I really love platform fighting games, from Smash Bros to multiverses to everything in between, and I really think more companies should try and compete with Smash's monopoly on the genre. I already made a video about how Disney could make their own game, and a lot of you really liked that video, so I thought, let's continue with the next strongest candidate, Sony. Sure, they do make some questionable business decisions, but they also have strong IP that could make a game like this work. Now, there is just one small problem, and it's that they have already made a platform fighter before. Let me explain. Back in the day, around 2011, I was in high school, and the console wars was going strong. Nintendo had some of the best brand recognition of all time, with many iconic and beloved characters under their belt, and this was highlighted in Super Smash Bros. Brawl a couple years earlier. And at the time, this was one of the biggest gaming crossovers ever. During this time, a lot of fans wanted Microsoft or Sony to take a swing at this type of game, but Microsoft really didn't have that many popular exclusive characters outside of Halo and Gears of War. However, Sony did, and in 2012, Sony made PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. This platform fighter had so many big Sony characters like Ratchet & Clank, Kratos, Sly Cooper, and even classic characters like Parappa the Rapper. The roster was stacked, although it was missing some key characters. And they also had some strange choices like Big Daddy and Raiden. But it was a very promising and hyped roster for this game. So then, why haven't 99% of you heard of this game? Well, because Sony didn't just copy Smash Bros. They took what was a winning formula and they made it so much worse. In Smash Bros, the more damage you take, the further you get knocked back until you're knocked completely out of the stage. PlayStation All-Stars, on the other hand, had a power meter that would charge, and then you could go for a special move, which was the only way to kill somebody and take a stock. If this sounds overly complicated, it's because it was. And it made the game feel really janky and beyond unbalanced because some people's super moves were just objectively better than others. The game just felt really cheaply made too. The UI and menus were basic and empty. It really was just a rushed mess. But now, over a decade later, Sony could make a platform fighter again. And this time, they can do it right. So let's discuss this hypothetical game and ask, what if Sony made a platform fighter again? And let's start by talking about this roster will be the same size as the original PlayStation All-Stars, as they had 20 characters in the beginning, 19 if you count Evil Cole and Cole as one. PlayStation All-Stars included some obvious choices, and some that were less desirable. So let me quickly go over the characters that are returning to this hypothetical new game, and I'll briefly explain why I chose them. And I won't be going into detail with their moveset because you can assume that the moveset will be very similar to PlayStation All-Stars. Okay, let's begin. Ratchet & Clank! Ratchet & Clank will return as one of the longest lasting characters in Sony's history. With a moveset around all their crazy weapons and using Clank to move around, they are going to be a full-on zoner character, with a wrench for close range attacks. Kratos will return, but he will be the older version with his beard and axe, and sadness. His moveset will be more heavily inspired from Ragnarok, which I think will make him less broken and much cooler in this game, because in the original game, he was busted. They had to nerf him 4 times. Sly Cooper! Sly Cooper unfortunately hasn't had a game in a while. And where's that movie, Sony, huh? But he's still iconic enough to keep his spot. With his moveset being around stealth and using his iconic cane to attack, he'll feel unique for sure. Jak and Daxter! Jak and Daxter have also been gone from the spotlight for a while, but they have earned a spot as Sony icons. With moves incorporating some of their weird weapons and movement, they will play a bit like a ranged brawler. Sackboy! Sackboy from Little Big Planet has been replaced as the cute Sony mascot. Sorry, Sackboy. But he still represents his era very well, and should return. His moveset will be all about building things mid-fight and creating space between himself and opponents. Parappa the Rapper! Parappa the Rapper represents the older era of Sony so well, and should also return. He should incorporate more dance moves and rapping as his moveset, with maybe his actual music and diss tracks doing damage to people mid-fight. Cat! Cat is from Gravity Rush, and she actually came to PlayStation All-Stars as DLC in the original game. But her game is super underrated, and she should be included. She'd be a crazy movement character manipulating gravity to zoom around and just be hard to deal with. Sweet Tooth. Sweet Tooth from Twisted Metal should return, and with the Hulu show being a success, he'd be a lot more popular of a character than he originally was. His moves would involve his cars, and fire, and a machete, and explosives. Nathan Drake. Nathan Drake from the Uncharted series needs to return. It would be a crime if he didn't. The moveset they came up with for him in the original game worked pretty well. It's hard to explain it, but it just fits his character. Cole McGrath. Cole McGrath from Infamous should also come back, but with a reworked moveset that incorporates good and evil Cole. So we wouldn't need an evil Cole McGrath to take up space in this roster. And that's all of the characters that are going to be returning from the original PlayStation All-Stars. Just 10 of them. The rest of the characters that I excluded were either too irrelevant, too uninspired, or just characters that aren't even exclusive to Sony or don't have a history with Sony specifically, like Big Daddy. I really never understood that choice. Like BioShock was an Xbox exclusive game when it first came out. Come on. Heihachi should be on this roster, but since the voice actor passed away, the character hasn't been in a Tekken game since, and it's also why Smash Bros didn't bring him and brought Kazuya instead. So out of respect, he'll also stay out of this game. So now, let's talk about who will be joining the roster. These are all going to be characters who are Sony exclusive characters or have a long history with Sony and should be in this game. Starting with Astrobot. For the longest time, Sony has been looking for a mascot, and Astrobot took the world by storm. He's super cute and he's super likable. And he also platforms like Mario in Mario Sunshine, so he can have a really cool moveset that incorporates a lot of these platforming capabilities. He'll definitely have his laser jump and attack very similarly to how he attacks in his game. And I think they should implement a couple of the cool different backpacks and abilities that he gets throughout the game, like turning into a little ball or becoming a balloon for recovery. There's so many possibilities you have with this character. On top of that, you have a ton of different costumes to choose from. He can literally wear a costume of every single character in this game. He's a shoe-in to not only be in this game, but be front and center on the posters and the game box. His stage can literally be a PS5. And no, not the new one that nobody wants and nobody asks for. Astrobot is too cute and way too popular now to not include in this game. Crash Bandicoot! It was a travesty when Crash Bandicoot wasn't even in the original game, and everyone who was a fan of PlayStation All-Stars was upset about it. Crash Bandicoot was intended to be the original PlayStation mascot, rivaling Mario from Nintendo and Sonic for Sega. And his original games are just as memorable and as iconic as some of those guys' classics. His moveset will definitely incorporate his spin attack, and of course the Aku Aku mask. I also think he could be like Minecraft Steve and leave TNT or poisonous boxes as traps, and even use the bouncy box as a recovery item. They could get really clever and creative with his moveset. His stage would have to be Dr. Neocortex's lab, with Neocortex in the background tampering with the players and just being goofy. So yeah, it would be insane not to get Crash in this celebration of Sony characters. Spyro the Dragon! Spyro is the other mascot Sony had during the Crash Bandicoot era. And although, like Crash, he is no longer exclusive to Sony, he also represents that era of Sony so well. And his moveset would have to be very unique. He's a little fire-breathing dragon, so of course his moveset would have him flying around and breathing fire, but it could also have clever nods to the different games he's been in. His main attacking moves, though, would be similar to how Yoshi plays in Smash Bros, but you know, just flying around with fire. His stage should be a cliffside on Artisan's Town Square, one of the original levels of his original game. It really is a shame that Sony didn't keep a hold of Crash and Spyro, but seeing them both in this game would make a lot of fans very happy, and the game wouldn't feel complete without them. Aloy! Aloy from the Horizon game series is an obvious pick. Her moveset would incorporate her bow and arrow and some of the other gadgets like traps and her blast sling. She would probably play the most like Link and Byleth from Smash Bros, but with a few more ranged options at her disposal. Perhaps she can even ride Sunwing as part of her recovery. The ideas for her moveset can really be all over the place because there's 2 games to work with and there's a lot of different things that she does. She also by default already has some really cool alt skins in her games, so you're gonna have some really cool options with her. Her stage could be on top of the Spire Tower and can have a bunch of the bosses and robotic animals deep in the background as references to her games. Aloy is just a shoo-in for the modern Sony era. The Hunter. Bloodborne is a phenomenal game, and the Hunter is such a cool character. Armed with some big-ass swords and the Hunter blunderbuss, he would play like Cloud from Smash Bros. With a bit more weaponry at his disposal. With how unique you can make the character, he would of course have a ton of alt costumes that look sick, referencing different parts of the game. His stage can be on top of a gothic-looking castle in Yharnam, which would just be so beautiful to play on, and you know the music would be epic as hell. Jin Sakai. Jin Sakai from Ghost of Tsushima is the quintessential sword fighter character, and with a sequel coming up in the next year or so, Jin just makes sense. His moveset would incorporate the parrying and samurai-style attacks that are seen throughout the game, as well as some of his ghost weapons, like firecrackers, smoke bombs, and even his grappling hook item. His stage would have to be on top of a Japanese castle, as that architecture would just look so clean. Ellie! The Last of Us came out right after the original PlayStation All-Stars, and now it's one of Sony's strongest IPs, so Ellie would definitely be a part of this game. Now her moveset would probably have to be a little creative, or else she would just shoot a gun, and that would really be it. So I think she should incorporate a loot mechanic, where she finds things and then can use them to make traps, or make noise and a stalker pops up out of the ground and attacks the enemy, and also she has to play guitar as a taunt.
They comfort me.
Her stage would be on top of an abandoned building with multiple types of zombies attacking throughout the match. It could make for a wild party type map. Sam Porter Bridges. Death Stranding is such a weird game, but it was a wildly successful one for Sony, and you just know that Sam's moveset will be silly. He could have a mechanic where over time you stack a ton of boxes, and they're all on your back and it's kind of hard to balance, and then your attacks will be using them or dropping them as moves. He kind of feels like a joke character, let's be honest. On top of actually using some of the anti-BT weaponry seen in the game. His map would be anywhere on the cliffs or hills of the Wastelands, where maybe weird references happen in the background, and storms happen of course. And of course we gotta get Norman Reedus to reprise the role. Imagine hearing him talk to Crash Bandicoot mid-game. Eve. Stellar Blade is also a recent Sony original that did very well. I mean, everybody was talking about it. I wonder why. So they will probably want to include Eve. I really don't know much about this game, to be completely honest, but I do know that Robot Lady is caked up. God damn! I have seen some gameplay, and I know Eve could have a fire moveset. She could probably play like a weird cross between Corrin and Bayonetta from Smash Bros, using her swords to attack and parry attacks, and also just having a bunch of different combo attacks, while using an arsenal of ranged explosive weapons that she has. Her stage can really be any destroyed buildings or bridges that are suspended in the air. There's a lot of places like that in the game, but Stellar Blade fans and Sony could probably make a stage that feels more fitting. Spider-Man! Okay, so Sony owns the video game rights to Spider-Man. So let's be honest with ourselves, they would 100% include him in this game, given the wild success of the last two Spider-Man games. Also, it's freaking Spider-Man. You know you kinda don't mind that he's here. His moveset would borrow a lot from his games, and reference some of his moves from Marvel vs. Capcom as well. He would be a fast, in-your-face brawler like Captain Falcon, but with way more vertical movement and a much better recovery. His stage would have to be on a skyscraper in New York. Duh. Most likely Oscorp or the Daily Bugle, or some other iconic building, with characters that you'd recognize inside talking and reacting to the battle. Okay, so that is the roster. 20 solid Sony characters. If the game launched today with this roster, I know people would be super hyped for it, as I think a lot of fans, both old school and new school, will have some characters that they are really excited to play. Now let's quickly talk about like my Disney video before, I'm going to basically suggest the same thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just copy Smash Bros mechanics. Time and time again, these companies in their hubris think that they can one-up Nintendo. You can't. So just don't do it. PlayStation All-Stars added extra buttons to fight with. We don't need that. Just use 2 attack buttons, a shield button, a jump button, a grab button. Trust me, people are dumb. Simpler is better. However, some elements from the original PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale can be carried over, but just reworked. The power meter can come back, but act as more of a final smash meter, with super strong power moves used after the meter is full, and they can even have 3 levels if you want. There should also be items again from all the franchises mentioned, as we still do want this game game to be a party game, but players should have the option to toggle on and off both the power meter and items for a more competitive experience, as well as turning off stage hazards. Now, if Sony wants to be better than its competition, they can support the esports side of the game. That's one way Sony could be better than Nintendo, guaranteed, because Nintendo doesn't even try. Also, you are in Japan, Sony, so there is a certain game developer in Japan who can make this game happen. Just saying. Like I said, nothing here is really different than what I've suggested before, but if it ain't broke. Now, unlike the last video, I do think Sony could sell this game at the standard price point and then release DLC on a semi-regular basis. It seems to be what Sony prefers to do, but in this world of free-to-play, it still might be wise to consider being free-to-play and do a bit more of a multiverses approach, but obviously a lot better because that game is greedy. Sony has one of the most popular consoles out there, but the PS5 has been roasted time and time again for having very little original games on it. But this one would definitely be a banger. They need to make sure to have a solid UI, good and clear menus, and polished gameplay, or else it will only ever be considered a worse Smash clone, like all the other Smash clones. Except you, Rivals of Aether, you did good. Sony is in the perfect position to compete in this genre. Over the decades since the original PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, they have made a lot more original games, and their IPs are getting stronger and better every year. At least the ones that get to last longer than a week. But what do you think? Do you like my roster? Which characters do you think I should have added? Or which characters do you feel like don't belong? Would you buy this game if it came out? And also, would you like to see me do this for Microsoft even though they do have limited IP, or a different company entirely? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you later.